Wow!
Deciding to move to Japan to work as an English teacher 4 years ago was easily the biggest decision I've made in my entire life. I'd never lived abroad, I'd never learned a foreign language, and I'd never taught English either. And quite honestly, the thought of standing in front of 40 school kids for 20 hours a week scared the absolute hell out of me. Naturally, a lot of people asked me why I came here. There was no one reason, but ultimately it revolved around a combination of ambition, romanticism and fear, albeit not in that order. For the first 2 decades of your life, you're kind of on an academic conveyor belt, going through school, doing tests and exams every year without really thinking that far ahead. And then for many people, when they reach the age of 18 and they come off the academic conveyor belt and they graduate from school, all of a sudden they have no plan and no sense of direction. And that was me when I graduated from school back in 2008. I knew I wanted to go to university, but I didn't really know what course I wanted to take. So I took film studies because it was the only thing I was good at. The only courses I'd done well in were media and film. I got an A and an A, and in business I got a B, and in English I got a C. So it wasn't that great. And I thought I'd go off to university and become the next Martin Scorsese, and it was going to be magical. But then suddenly around September, which is when you start university in the UK, I realised becoming Martin Scorsese is not that easy. And all of a sudden I realised I was probably making a big mistake. And after speaking to some film studies graduates at my local supermarket, I realised that studying film at university probably wasn't the best thing to do. So I postponed my degree and took a gap year to get a sense of direction and get some clarity on who I was and what I was doing. So in September 2008, with all my closest friends going off to university, I went off in the other direction and started planning my gap year. Now, some people spend their gap year travelling the world, swimming with dolphins and building villages in Africa. And to me, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted a year of unbridled adventure and discovery, and it was gonna be amazing. And then I got a full-time office job, staring at Excel spreadsheets for 40 hours a week, and it was the worst year of my life ever. Having finished school and delayed my degree for a year, I now found myself in an office job in an energy company, just moving numbers around a spreadsheet 5 days a week. My adventurous plans to travel around the world were destroyed by my lack of money, and even though I had 2 jobs, the relatively small amount of money I made just about covered my monthly expenses, but certainly wasn't enough for any real overseas travel. And after a few months I just became depressed as I realised my gap year wasn't going anywhere. It was just nothing, it was rubbish. For someone like me who likes to be creative, who likes to make things, being trapped in an office job with absolutely no creativity was just a horrific fate to be consigned to. But it was while I was working in this mind-numbing office job that my imagination started to take over. Sitting at that desk for hours on end doing nothing of any real value, I became obsessed with the idea of entrepreneurship, and I got addicted to reading autobiographies and biographies of self-made millionaires, people who had come from nothing and gone on to do great things. And whilst I was sitting at this desk doing nothing, I became consumed by this idea of starting my own business one day in the future. And it became a bit of a running joke with my colleagues as I started sitting there on my lunch break reading books as opposed to sitting with the usual crowd. I didn't mind at first, I found it quite funny, but when I started talking about my dreams and my ambitions, about starting a business, I kind of was met with lots of pessimism and laughter, and everyone was kind of very dismissive. In the UK, you'll find people who are ambitious are kind of shot down and ridiculed more often than not. If you tell someone about your plans to do something great, you'll usually just be dismissed and it'll kind of put you down. It's quite the opposite to America in that regard, where everyone believes they can do something great and there's a real sense of entrepreneurship embedded in the culture. But after 6 months of reading all these stories of entrepreneurs and becoming completely consumed by the idea of starting a business, I came to the worrying realisation that I lacked the self-confidence and the sort of self-belief to ever become an entrepreneur, and I knew I would never succeed. I wanted to be Blastoise, but I was a mere fucking Squirtle. So I came to the conclusion the only way I was going to ever level up was to do something really bold and out of character for me at the time. And I decided I would give myself the ultimate challenge of living and working abroad and learning a new language in a completely different country, and throw myself into the thick of it after university. Only then would I level up and evolve into Blastoise, or drown in the deep end. Quite honestly, this idea of living and working abroad really scared me. It really was outside my comfort zone. The area of the world that I knew I wanted to try living in was Asia, because I wanted to see the world from a completely different perspective. I figured if I could live in a country in Asia and try and acquire a new language and adapt to a different culture, then I could probably feel like I could do anything. And I knew, as it was outside my comfort zone, there was a chance that it might work. After doing some research online, I discovered the easiest job to get overseas was an English teaching job. So in early 2009, I switched my degree from film to business and English linguistics. And the final piece of the puzzle fell into place in April 2009 when I went to visit my then girlfriend, who was on a ski season in the French Alps, having the time of her life, which I definitely wasn't envious about. It was on the trip to France that fate kind of jumped in and steered the direction my life would take. On the flight over, I found myself sitting next to a friendly, middle-aged couple, and we chatted for the duration of the 2-hour flight. We got onto the inevitable subject of what I wanted to do after university, and I told them that I wanted to go and travel the world and become an English teacher. As luck or fate or destiny or coincidence would have it, their daughter was working as an English teacher in Japan on the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, the JET program. And they told me of their daughter's amazing experiences in Japan, and apparently she was having the time of her life. And throughout the duration of the flight, they sold this idea to me, this idea of living and working in Japan. After I got off the plane, there was a 4-hour coach journey from the airport to the ski resort. And for the entire 4-hour journey, I just kept thinking of this crazy and exciting idea of living and working in Japan, whilst listening to Phil Collins, because for some reason it was the only artist I had on my phone at the time. But I didn't know a great deal about Japanese culture. I'd never really been into anime or manga. I watched quite a few Japanese films and lots of films set in Japan, and I had lots of images and misconceptions about the country. But I was excited by what I didn't know about the country and what I could learn, rather than what I already knew. I just pictured myself walking through these beautiful rice fields and temples, singing karaoke and drinking beer with strangers and salarymen, and having romantic encounters like Lost in Translation. I'd always wanted to visit the country, but 2 weeks just didn't seem like enough, and it was so far away that I never thought I'd ever be able to go. And I realised by living and working there, I'd really be able to absorb the culture and truly appreciate the country and the language and the people. And so by the time the coach pulled up at the ski resort, I remember getting off with this idea that I was going to live and work in Japan. In fact, I remember saying to my girlfriend when I got off the bus, I've decided to move to Japan, and I don't think she took me too seriously, and to be honest, not even I took myself that seriously, but my mind was made up there and then. And it was from then on that I started to read and learn about the culture, and for the next few years, through my awful, boring job, through a degree that I didn't really enjoy and university studies that bored me, Japan was my guiding star. This idea of living and working in Japan gave me a sense of direction and purpose, and it made me realise the importance of having a dream and a sense of direction and an aim, because after that I became really motivated, and for the first time ever I actually put some serious effort into my academic studies. And 3.5 years later, after that decision on that bus, lo and behold, I found myself sitting in a chair in my tiny apartment whinging about a noisy hall. Having stood in front of hundreds of people and spoken in Japanese, managed classrooms with 40 teenagers in, and just learned how to read and communicate in a completely alien language, all my confidence issues and lack of self-belief have completely disappeared and faded away, and I feel I can truly do anything I want now. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video though, it is have a dream, be bold, make it scary, make it challenging, and then go off and do it. Push yourself out of your comfort zone, and you will feel amazing when you go off and triumph.